Hey, all right, week 5. So we've got our first exam behind us. We will have a chance to talk about that a little bit more when we meet in person for this week's lab. But just real quick, while that's fresh on our minds, exam 1. Now, I think a lot of times when you're starting a new class, if you've never had an instructor before, if you've never had the subject before, the worst part's just not knowing what to expect. You don't know how the questions are going to be set up, what format and things like that. So for everybody, now that we've gone through the first exam, hopefully that gives you a little bit better idea of what to expect on the future ones. That'll help you, study and prepare too. So take that from this first test. All right, the average on the first exam, it was not bad. There were some really good grades. It kind of spanned from all the different letters pretty evenly. So what I want you to take from that is I'm going to describe 3 different categories and figure out which one you fit into. If you did really well on the first exam, that's awesome. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't let up, because the second exam is it's not terrible, but out of all of the exams I give, when I go back and I look at the average for each test, the second exam's maybe just a little bit tougher. And it's honestly, I think it's just because, like, if you've watched the Chapter 3 lecture video, you were supposed to do that last week. If you did that, there's a lot of material. It's kind of dense and it's packed in there a lot. So I'm not trying to scare anyone on that, but just if you did good, that's great. Just keep doing what you're doing. Don't let up, all right? Now, back to exam 2 real quick. I know that sounded like that was really depressing and intimidating. I've got students who do great on the second exam. I've got a lot of students who actually do better on the second exam than they do on the first exam, and it's just because they changed the way that they study. So that gets into group 2. If you felt like you did everything you knew how to do, you studied, you took notes and all that, but your grade didn't reflect that, like you didn't score as well as you thought you should have, reach out to me, talk to me, send me a message after lab this week. Stick around and we can look at how you're studying. I'll try to give you some tips. So one thing, should be obvious, but for everybody, make sure, like I said earlier, you are watching those lecture videos. Got a lot of students who are watching every single one, and that's great. That's really good. There's some students who still aren't, or maybe you're watching part 1 and you don't have time and you don't get around to part 2 and 3. You got to watch those. I mentioned to a couple students in person last week is that the way I describe those, the lecture videos are like if we were meeting in a regular class and we show up and we lecture. You can just read the PowerPoints if you want to. That's fine, but that would be like never showing up for a lecture and only looking at the notes at home. That's not the best way to prepare. You need someone to help kind of explain it a little bit. Look at when you started studying. So I know a lot of times, and I was guilty of this too, in some classes you can study the night before, or maybe even 2 nights before, and do okay on the test. Biology is probably not a class where you can do that, just because it gets to be a lot of material. So make sure that you're spreading out. Like this week, watch Chapter 4. Don't wait until right before the test. Make notes. Send me any questions you have. But just be really honest with yourself as far as how did I study and how did I prepare for this. And if you still haven't figured out what you can do, definitely, please let me know. I want you to contact me, and I'll try to give you some tips and hints that maybe you can do to do better. All right, group 3, this one should be obvious. If you didn't study, if you didn't watch the lecture videos, and you didn't do well, let this be a learning experience. Just don't do that again, because if you do the same thing over and over, you'll probably end up with the same result. All right. Okay, I've rambled about that a little bit longer than I meant to, so let's move on to what we're doing this week. For the lecture you need to watch, Chapter 4 is on cells. Now, there's only 2 parts, but they're kind of longer parts. I think one of them's 50 minutes, one of them's about 40 minutes. So part 1 is going to be on just kind of like an introduction to cells in general, and we're going to talk a lot about prokaryotes. Those are bacteria. They're pretty simple cells. Part 2 is going to be on eukaryotes, and that's where we start talking about plant cells and animal cells and all the organelles, all the cell parts that they have. So those are the 2 parts that you need to watch this week. Again, like I just said, take notes, send me any questions you have, and please feel free to reach out if you've got any questions about any of that material. All right. Review quiz for Chapter 4 is going to be Sunday, February 14th, Valentine's Day. Feel free to do that beforehand so you're not thinking about having to do schoolwork on Valentine's Day night. Maybe you have something better planned. And then for the class meeting this week, we're going to do a lab. on biological macromolecules. That sounds awful. Just like hearing that sounds like it's like ridiculous chemistry stuff. All this is, if you remember last week's lecture, was on, we talked about carbohydrates and proteins and lipids and nucleic acids. So we're going to test several different chemicals and see if we can detect those different groups. We're going to have a bunch of different chemicals, and we're going to test and see if we can detect protein. We're going to observe lipids. We got a couple different sugars we're going to test for. So I like this one. This one's a little bit more hands-on experiment than the last lab that we did. You're actually going to get to mix some stuff together, look for a color change, and like write down the results that you found. All right. So just remember, Group A is going to be Tuesday. Group B will be Thursday. And most everybody turned in your COVID form and your lab safety sheet. Just if you didn't do that last time we had lab, make sure that you print that off and bring it with you. I'll try to bring some copies, some extras. But I'm pretty forgetful at 8 o'clock in the morning, so print that off and bring it with you so you can turn it in. Lab manual, make sure you've got that. I know I had a few students who didn't have theirs on the first week. And what I did for you on the first week, because it was the first time we're meeting, is I ran off a copy and you had lab 1. I can't do that anymore. So if you don't have a lab manual with you, I don't have anything to take up and grade. Just make sure that you have that. All right. If you need anything, let me know, and I will see you on lab day.